Not long after that, the security guard at our building found something wedged underneath the window to my sister's bedroom. It was a little doll made with sticks and tied together with thin leather strings. It had a little skirt fashioned out of a piece of fabric. Its head had been covered in wax and had needles inserted into it from all sides. When he showed it to my mom, she refused to touch it and called my dad straight away. Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers, the paranormal podcast where I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. When I was in grade 5, I watched the movie The Craft for the first time. If you're unfamiliar, it's about a group of 4 teenage girls who are outcast at their high school and find out that together they can harness the power of real witchcraft. As you would expect with a bunch of teenage girls, they use their powers to become beautiful, popular, and get back at their bullies. I loved this movie so much, I tried to start my own coven at recess, and we played light as a feather, stiff as a board with fellow witches. In Western culture, witches and witchcraft have run the gamut from friendly witches like Samantha in Bewitched and Sabrina Spellman in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, to the children-eating Sanderson sisters in Hocus Pocus and the evil Marie Laveau in American Horror Story. There's also true life stories of witches and witchcrafts that have made it into popular media, such as the Bell Witch, who terrorized the Bell family in Adams, Tennessee. Throughout history, witches have been blamed for failed crops, sudden illness, nightmares, and death. Witches have existed in some form across nearly every culture in the world. In Europe, witches can be seen as packed with the devil's type, with broomsticks, black cats, and human sacrifices. In Africa, the Caribbean, and indigenous traditions, witches can be healers, shapeshifters, or dangerous sorceresses, depending on the context and who you asked. Sometimes feared, sometimes revered. Witches and witchcrafts are always correlated with curses. A curse could be a way for someone who feels like they have been wronged to seek justice. In many cultures, curses are binding and generational, meaning they don't just affect the target, but they haunt the bloodline. In this episode, I'll be recounting true stories of people who believe they had been cursed by a witch or have personally met one. This is also a special episode because I'm doing a story swap with fellow podcast, The Red Treehouse, hosted by Will Soto. The first story that I am reading, The Strange Tale of Christopher Case, was originally narrated on Will's podcast, The Red Treehouse. Will featured my Ouija board stories on his podcast. Thank you, Will, for sharing this story with me. And if you love all things creepy and spooky, I strongly recommend you check out the Red Treehouse Podcast. I've linked it in the show notes. Now, let's not waste any more time. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen in. This episode is sponsored by the Finalist app. As many of you know, this podcast is a one-woman show. I research, write, edit, and host the podcast by myself, and I personally use the Finalist app to keep track of my to-do list for the podcast and stay on top of my schedule outside of the podcast as well. You can download the app in the Apple App Store, and I've linked it in the show notes. The app features a free version and a paid version with a 7-day free trial. Best of all, Finalist is offering 50% off a 1-year subscription to all Chillers and Thrillers listeners. Enter the code THRILL50 or use the link in the show notes to redeem your 50% off code immediately. Thank you so much to Finalist for supporting this indie podcast. The Strange Tale of Christopher Case, submitted by the Red Treehouse Podcast. In 1991, Christopher Case was a popular and well-liked 35-year-old music executive for Muzak Holdings, a company that produced soft music heard in elevators and waiting rooms all over the world. Christopher grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and in the years prior to taking the role at Muzak Holdings, Christopher worked as a small-town radio DJ in Raleigh, North Carolina. After taking the job as a music executive, he moved his entire life to Seattle, where by all accounts he excelled in his new role. Christopher was a well-rounded individual, driven, hardworking, friendly. He was devoted to maintaining his physical fitness, taking supplements daily, and working out regularly. He also had a few well-known quirks. He was a loner who, despite having caught the eye and attention of potential female suitors, had been single for many years. He also loved music. One article stated Christopher loved compositions of the ancient world. He enjoyed listening to his favorite music, and it appears that he was a quiet man who was as likely to enjoy the company of his favorite artist as he was his close friends. On April 11, 1991, Christopher took a business trip to San Francisco, where he met with other music executives. The details about this next part are near impossible to find, but sometime during this trip, he was introduced to a woman who, like Christopher, had a passion for ancient music. One article stated he had been introduced to an older, unmarried woman who shared his passion for music of the ancient world, particularly that of Egypt and other Mediterranean civilizations. As the conversation progressed, the woman expressed her desire, more than once, for Christopher to take her home. Though he enjoyed the interaction, Christopher politely declined these requests, as the woman was at least 20 years his senior. What started as a pleasant conversation between two people sharing an obscure mutual interest quickly turned dark and ominous. The woman, upset by his rejection, told Christopher that she was a witch and that he would be sorry. She told him she was a witch, had put a curse on him, and that he would be dead within a week. Unfazed by this, Christopher and the woman went their separate ways, and he traveled back to Seattle without giving her statements of second thought. When he arrived at home, he called his closest friends, including Sammy Soter, and told them of the strange interaction. They, too, brushed it off. A few days went by uneventfully, and Christopher seemed to have forgotten all about the woman and her curse. But on the morning of April 14th, Christopher called his friend Sammy Soter. He was panicked and out of breath. After calming down, he told her what happened the previous night. He had been kept awake most of the night by whispering voices. Christopher was certain they were coming from inside his house, and though he checked each of the rooms, he was unable to determine the source. He reported seeing shadows moving across his apartment, and this was odd because Christopher lived alone. He explained that he had an overwhelming feeling that he was being watched by someone or something all night. A few days later, on April 16th, Christopher called Sammy again. This time, he explained the terrifying experience from a few hours prior. He had been attacked. He woke up in the middle of the night, paralyzed, and pushed into the mattress. He felt pressure on his chest and a tightening around his throat. When he opened his eyes to see his attacker, there was no one there. Just the pitch blackness of the room around him. The attack grew more forceful and violent as the invisible attacker lifted Christopher off the mattress, and his body hung midair for several seconds before slamming him down onto the bed, rendering him unconscious. Later that morning, before calling Sammy, Christopher noticed his bedsheets were covered in dark pools of blood, and after trying to determine the location of the wound, discovered cuts on the ends of each of his fingers. Now frantic and thoroughly scared, Christopher visited a local Christian bookstore, Evangel Incorporated, where manager Rodney Higuchi recommended various books on spiritual warfare, witchcraft, and the occult. During this visit, the store manager noted Christopher's calm but determined demeanor as he purchased candles, crucifixes, and books. By that afternoon, Christopher had begun his preparation to fight whatever this was attacking him. He placed crucifixes in various rooms of the house. He poured salt lines on the threshold of the house and in various rooms. He read through the books and scribbled detailed notes on waging spiritual warfare. By now, Christopher was obsessed with and terrified of the violent entity that had been visiting him each night. There's not much known about what happened on the nights of April 16th and into the morning of April 17th, but we do know Christopher was so scared by what he encountered that he left his home and checked into a hotel. The morning of April 17th, after leaving the hotel, he went to a local Catholic church where he met briefly with Father James Mellahan, who expressed concern for Christopher's well-being. Christopher explained that he was being attacked by something evil and that he was terrified it was going to kill him. He returned to the Evangel Incorporated bookstore, and on his second visit, Rodney noticed that Christopher was more frantic and visibly shaken. Christopher reported he was being attacked by a paranormal entity and he needed help. On the morning of April 17th, Sammy attempted to contact Christopher but could not reach him as he had not gotten back home from his hotel stay. Concerned, she contacted the local police department and asked them to do a welfare check. Upon arriving at Christopher's home, the police found the front door locked, and without a warrant or cause to enter, they left and contacted Sammy to let her know. Panic started to build up as she was forced to wait to hear from Christopher directly, and later that night, she found a message from Christopher on her answering machine. The message said, "Hi, Sammy, this is Christopher. Well, they just about got me, you know. They're trying to kill me. So whatever it is I do to send myself doesn't work anymore. That's what it's coming down to." Sammy noted the calmness in Christopher's voice, as the panic was replaced with a calm resignation, almost like he'd accepted his fate and knew what was in store. This would be the last time anyone would ever hear from Christopher again. The next morning, after not hearing from Christopher, Sammy once again reached out to the police department and asked them to do a welfare check. This time, she explained that Christopher was afraid someone was out to kill him and told them about the witch's curse from the week prior. The officers went back to Christopher's home, and what they found was straight out of a horror movie. When they entered the apartment, their senses were immediately bombarded. They observed lines of salt along the threshold, and every wall of the house with small pillars in every corner. They smelled burned-down candles, noted the crucifixes scattered everywhere, and heard the eerie sound of music. But not just one type of music. Christopher had turned on several different types of religious music at the same time. And as the officers attempted to make sense of the confusing scene, they made their way through each room of the apartment. The sounds of Gregorian chants and various other religious music providing the background. Eventually, they came to the bathroom door, which had an eerie light escaping from the bottom. They pushed it open, where they found Christopher Case, fully clothed in his bathtub, knees pressed to his chest, with his head leaning against the wall. He was dead. While no one knows for sure what happened to Christopher the week prior, his autopsy revealed he passed away from myocarditis, a rare heart infection. The Generational Feud, submitted by user AngelMCH. I know people won't believe me. In fact, for a long time, I didn't believe any of this until I began experiencing supernatural things myself. Basically, my family has a decades generational-long feud, an inter-family feud. One of the daughters of my maternal grandmother practices dark witchcraft, the kind where you have to kill family members and use their blood in your rituals. Not the sing to the moonlight and make lavender sage tonic type that we see extremely popular on social media today. I will start with one of the earliest events that my cousins and siblings were around for. One of the witnesses is my extremely level-headed, no-nonsense sibling who doesn't really like discussing this unless pressed. I was a newborn baby during this event. Apparently, there was a family party where the children were outside playing and the adults were inside the house. As dusk fell, the children, including my sister, noticed a funny-looking bird land in a tree on the property. It was a normal bird, though rather large. To their horror, it suddenly morphed into an old woman in a tree. Then, as they screamed, it was a bird again. Before the parents came running outside to check on the screaming, it changed between an old lady and a bird a few times. When the parents arrived outside, the thing was just a bird, but it wouldn't leave, no matter how many adults shooed it away, and not even after they threw rocks at it. It wasn't until my grandmother, a formidable, God-fearing type of woman, stepped outside did it fly away. The family mused on it for a long while until after they found out about the daughter who practiced dark witchcraft. You see, they started to hear rumors about her. Then a trusted family friend came to one of them and told them that they feared for the family because they knew my aunt was doing terrible things to her own family, including her own mother, my grandmother. We eventually learned she would harass my grandmother's homes with apparitions and other evil things, and that bird was just one of the evil things she had sent. Stella, submitted by user Miss Z. This took place when I was about 11 years old, and I remember that period in my life quite vividly, despite the fact that no one in my family will talk about it. I think we're collectively afraid of resurrecting the past. It all started when my dad started working longer hours. My dad had established his own company and was starting to become quite successful. Mom could afford to quit her job and stay with us full-time. We moved to a new apartment on the ground floor of a nice building with security and a garden. Dad starts paying more attention to his clothes, wearing fancy cologne, and working even longer hours at work. I had this nagging feeling that he had a secret, and whenever my mom suggested a family vacation somewhere, he would readily agree, but at the last minute, something would come up, and we would end up going ahead without him at his insistence. One night, I heard him talking on the phone late at night in his study, and my heart sank. My dad was having an affair. Soon enough, it became apparent not only to me, but also to my mom. They'd start having arguments at night in their bedroom when they thought we were asleep and couldn't hear them. I could hear my little sister crying in her room at night, and I remember feeling so helpless because no matter what I did, she was inconsolable and heartbroken. Our parents did their best to talk to us. We never felt like it was our fault, but the potential split of your family was a lot to process. Eventually, Dad decides to break things off with the woman he was having the affair with. Let's call her Stella, so that him and Mom can try to work things out. I actually remember them talking in the kitchen before he went to break up with Stella, and he came back with deep scratch marks all over his face and neck. I hugged him right there in the hallway, and he collapsed on the floor, saying he would never abandon his family again and kept apologizing to us. We all had a good cry, do this big cheesy family hug, and for the first time in months, I feel optimistic. Like, maybe things will get back to normal now? Then Stella starts calling our house. It was always during the day when it was just me and my sister at home. We had no idea how she knew when my mom was out. If we didn't pick up the phone, it would just keep ringing, which I found infuriating. One time, I let it ring for an hour, and she just wouldn't let up. If you picked up, she would be silent. She was clearly messing with us. My sister and I talked amongst ourselves and decided not to tell Mom or Dad, which was a stupid decision. As the phone calls stop, my sister starts sleepwalking and wetting the bed. She becomes increasingly withdrawn and uncommunicative. She's also having severe migraines. My parents chalk it up to the stress of the past few months since the doctors, and they'd been to so many, couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. Every time she sleepwalks, she goes into my parents' bedroom and taps my mother on the shoulder until she wakes up. This became her routine, and in the absence of a remedy, we were desperately hoping that she would grow out of it. Then, one night, I wake up because my mom is screaming. I bolted out of my bed and ran to their bedroom. My sister is standing next to my parents' bed, motionless. My mom is holding her face like she's been struck and is shocked. We've all heard that you're not supposed to wake a sleepwalking person, but seeing as my sister punched my mom in the face, my dad decides to wake her up. She's surprised and a little scared, and I sleep with her in the room that night. I cradle her until she falls asleep, but I myself can't. My mom had a big shiner the next day. Not long after that, the security guard at our building found something wedged underneath the window to my sister's bedroom. It was a little doll made with sticks and tied together with thin leather strings. It had a little skirt fashioned out of a piece of fabric. Its head had been covered in wax and had needles inserted into it from all sides. When he showed it to my mom, she refused to touch it and called my dad straight away. My parents are both atheists. They're not the kind of people to get spooked easily and aren't superstitious. But as soon as the guard shows him the stick figure and tells him where he found it, my dad reached out to the main temple for help, like it was the only thing to do. We live in a predominantly Buddhist country. About 8 monks showed up at our apartment the following day, prayed all day, and cleansed the apartment. I overheard my uncle and dad talking in the kitchen, and apparently the head monk had said the stick figure had been put there by someone intent on bringing death into our family. My sister recovered after that. My parents are still happily married, and I have never heard anything about Stella again. The Gift, submitted by user Sadybug. I feel like to start the story of the haunting that I've experienced, I have to first tell you about the time I got my palm read by an older woman I used to waitress with. I was working at a pretty crappy chain restaurant, and on this particular day, the place was empty. I was hiding in a section when an older lady I worked with asked if I could help her out. Her side work had been to mop the floors, but her back was bothering her. No problem. I mopped the floors for her, and she, in return, told me she'd read my palm. I've always been skeptical of these kinds of things and just laughed it off. The woman was a bit odd anyway. She claimed to be a witch and that supernatural powers ran in the family, and that all the women in her family had the gift of prophecy. Cue me rolling my eyes whenever she mentioned it. But after I finished mopping the floors, I let her take a look at my palms despite my skepticism. First off, she informs me I have a very kind heart, to which all I can think of is no duh, I just washed the floors for you. But then she started to get more personal about me, saying things about me she had no way of knowing. It went on like this for a couple of minutes, and I was getting more and more uncomfortable. Then, she told me she could see lives I would save, which made no sense to me, but she kept insisting on it, even telling me I was going to save a life very soon, and it would be the first of many. 2 days later, a friend called me, telling me she had found a newborn kitten, and asked if I wanted to take it in because it was dying, and she didn't want to have to deal with that. I nursed the kitten back to health and still have her, and would discover I have a knack for taking care of sick neonatal kittens, and 4 years later I have saved many very sick kittens. I always assumed that was what she saw in my hands, the kittens I've saved. But there was one last thing she said to me that stuck with me more than anything. She told me that while I had no psychic ability with very little imagination, and that I was deadened to the world of the supernatural. She explained to me about how some people have a gift for sensing and seeing things, even being able to communicate with them, but not me. I was completely closed off to the other world. Which is why my encounter with the supernatural years later creeps me out so much more. My mother is a Montessori teacher, a good one, and when I was 6, a teacher friend of my mother's called her about a Montessori school that was being built in a small town, and that they were desperate to have her work there. So we moved to the small farming town, and when the school was done being built, I started there as a first grader, and my mom taught in the elementary class. The building itself was brand new, but the land it was built on had once been an old dairy farm, and remnants of that farm still remain to this day. An old crumbling house stands boarded up and blocked off in the large fields that the middle schoolers use as their playground. There's a huge barn that was once used for storage, but now it's so decrepit that no one dares enter it anymore. The barn and the house never scared me. It was always a sight of fun and exploration. But to the other kids in the school, it was another story. I could not drag my friends over to the barn to save my life. Most of the kids wouldn't even look at it, claiming that it was creepy and haunted. Now, this might have stemmed from the fact that the older kids would spread rumors about ghosts and dead bodies found on the school grounds, which I knew were false since I had the inside source of my mother. Now that I'm older, I'm not sure if it was because of my apparent ignorance to the other world that was what caused me to never fear the old farm, or if it was just because I was, and always have been, an adventurous person. I went to the school until 9th grade, and I still loved to explore the outbuildings on the grounds, while the other kids still got the creeps from them. But then, something happened. Not to me, but to a little girl several grades below me. One of the teachers at the school that worked with my mother had a little girl who had just started 1st grade. She could see things, according to her mother, that weren't there ever since she was a baby, and talked and played with invisible people. Her mother always chalked it up to imaginary friends and having an active imagination, until she got older and it became harder to ignore. It was a weekend during the summer, and the teacher needed to go to the school to set up the classroom and brought her daughter with her. Everything was fine until they left the building and were walking to the car, when the girl suddenly asked her mom who the old man that was waving at them was. The teacher said she immediately turned around, scared to death, looking all over the place. It was late in the evening and they were the only people there, but the girl insisted and pointed at the barn, just as scared as her mom was, saying, "He doesn't look nice. He's waving at me. I think he wants me to go over there." The teacher, still not seeing anyone, dragged the girl to the car and drove off, and never came back by herself again. But that wasn't the last time the girl saw him. Her mom tells me that after that day, she would hear daily about old mean man that stood by the barn and beckoned to the little girl. Years and years later, I ended up going back to that school as a summer camp instructor that worked before school care. I had to be at that school before everyone at 6:30 to watch the kids that were dropped off early. The whole summer, I only had one little girl. She was 3 years old, very sweet, and a little quirky. She would show up at the same time I did. For the first couple of hours, it would just be her and me at the school alone. The little girl was very shy the first couple of weeks of camp and preferred to play by herself. But I soon began to notice that the little girl would become extremely distraught over seemingly nothing. She would shut down and I would not be able to communicate with her, so I'd end up holding her while she cried. I always assumed she just missed her mom and was confused and upset, since this was her first time being away from home. Finally, she began to get comfortable with me. She started talking more, and we would spend the mornings playing together. But she would still have her episodes, and during one of them, as I held her on my lap, she choked out in sobs that she was scared of the angry old man standing outside the window, next to the barn. My Mother's Curse, submitted by user Bedili Bay. My mother grew up in rural Mexico, where there's still a fair amount of witchcraft being practiced. I've been there once to visit an uncle who was a pretty respected doctor who practiced a blend of Western and traditional medicine, i.e. witchery, in his small clinic where he accepted anything from cash to produce to farm animals as payment from his patients. Her family never really forgave her for going against their wishes and marrying my dad, an older white man, after she came to America to live with her sister and her family. For the longest time, she would tell us that her brother had put a curse on her because of this, and this explained the spirits she always complained about bothering her. I was around 8 years old when she remarried and moved out of our house. My parents lived together for years after their divorce until she met my stepdad, so I never really experienced any of the weirdness that plagued her. I guess there were the times when she said that she would go to sleep and dream that she got up and walked in to the painting of a seascape that hung above the fireplace mantel. She claimed that whenever she had those dreams, she would wake up and her feet would be dripping with water. When I was just starting high school, she had moved to an old house with my stepdad and younger half-sister. My older sister and I would spend the weekends there to give my dad some peace and quiet. It was at this time and place where I learned that my mother had been going through this the whole time. Also, why she basically had an army of cats. The house had 2 bedrooms, so I ended up sleeping on a sofa in the living room. From this spot, I had a clear sight on the French doors of the room my mother and stepdad slept in. One night, I woke up to the sound of their door slamming shut. I assumed it was a cat, or perhaps it was open and my mom or stepdad had accidentally closed it too hard. In the morning, my mom told me that she had woken up in the middle of the night to a dark figure standing over her. Another time, I was sleeping on the sofa when I heard a knocking on the outside of the house. That started from one side of the house and going all around to the other side of the house. I mentioned this to my mom in the morning, and she said she had heard this quite often. Eventually, the only way I could get any sleep there was if I had one of her cats fall asleep on my stomach first. It was the weirdest thing because I would be feeling totally sketched out, but as soon as one of her cats came and rested on me, I would feel calm and almost as if I was protected. My Family's Bell Witch, submitted by user Anita Darling. As long as I can remember, and especially when I was a little kid, there was folklore surrounding my mom's side of the family. The kind of story passed down and passed down again so that I could recite it on a moment's notice. I'm originally from Nashville, but my mom's side goes further back, to a small town called Adams, Tennessee. In the 1800s, my distant relative, John Bell, lived on a working farm with his wife Lucy and children John Jr. and Betsy. The Bell name might be familiar. It's where the Bell Witch got its start. The story my mom always told me was that John Bell, though liked by most in the small town, made an enemy out of one woman in particular, Kate Batts. Legend went that her scorn went past this world into straight-up hauntings. Animals began acting strange and running away, dishes and glassware inexplicably breaking. But Betsy Bell seemed to get the worst of it, waking up in the middle of the night, being clawed and slapped by invisible hands. There was even an instance of Andrew Jackson going to visit the family, and once at the gate, his horses began acting so violently, bucking up and down, he could go no further. So what does this mean for me, a direct descendant of John Bell? Under no circumstances can I ever pass through Adams, Tennessee, lest I want the wrath of Kate. My grandpa was a wholesale liquor distributor, and in the 70s that meant a lot of house calls, not just to businesses. He also had a weekly poker night. On one such night, he got out of his car, made sure it was locked, as he had his wares in the back seat. A few hours later, after the game ended, he went to his car. Out of instinct, pulled the handle, expecting it to catch, as he had locked it. Not only was the car no longer locked, but my grandpa swore up and down a huge black cat leapt out of the car, scratching his face and arms on its way out. As it happened, earlier that day, my uncle, my mom's brother, was leaving Nashville on a trip. As a shortcut, he thought he'd test his luck by passing through Adams. No sooner had he crossed into the city limits that he nearly veered off the road due to a sudden flat tire. Other curious incidences happened in my family. My mom and her sister both wrote school papers on the Bell Witch. Years later, when my grandmother was going through things, she was able to find every school picture, every drawing, every test, but not those papers. Any writing on the Bell Witch mysteriously disappeared. I, too, wrote a paper in 8th grade about this strange bit of my family's history. It's nowhere to be found. And that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories, and as always, I would love to hear your thoughts and theories. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can buy me a coffee, or most importantly, share with your paranormally inclined friends and family, and leave me a rating, review, and comment when possible. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.